Today I'm going to talk about some quick updates about the Suzanne Morphew case. I want to go over some of my thoughts about the search that took place, the home going up for sale by Barry, and the Dr. Phil interview that we saw Andy Moorman on. First, let's start with Barry Morphew listing their home for sale. Now, this is the house that we're all familiar with seeing at this point. This is the Puma Path house. It was listed for right under $1.8 million, and it's on the market. Now, a lot of you have been talking to me, showing me the things and like, what do you think? And da-da-da-da-da. And these are the three trains of thought that I see going on with this. Some people are like, look, it's a spec house. He couldn't afford to live in that anyways. Others are like, look, he's trying to run and hide, And the third path here that everyone kind of feels is the timing is just a little, not so good. Now, here's the thing. Do I know Mr. Barry's personal, financial situation? No. So there's that. So whether he, this was a spec house and they're getting rid of it, whatever, it does just seem kind of odd that the timing of this, like almost right on the heels of the search being done, he's like, bam, okay, here, let's list this and move on. The one aspect to that I'm like, okay, well, at least this took place, is that he has opened that home up for numerous searches at this point, including the one that Andy Moorman organized, that he allowed them to come out onto the property, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So at least that much has been done. So I do feel like there is this level of, okay, look, whatever happened to her, whoever did it, whatever, most likely it might not have taken place there at that house. I feel like they might have already hit on something if it did indeed. That being said, I'm very curious how many people are going to want to go check this house out. Like, what's their vetting process to get rid of, curious onlookers? Who's going to really want to move in there knowing what's kind of going on? So let's sit here and talk for a minute about those searches that took place. Now, before we even get into it, many of you are already following Profiling Evil. That is another YouTube channel. They have a website. We'll get into that as well. They have been working very closely on this case, directly with many investigators, Andy Moorman. So definitely check their, videos out if you want to see some on-the-ground reporting, all that type stuff. I'm just going to be doing some commentary on some of the things that Andy discussed with them that stuck out to me, but those links are in the description. So again, they had Andy on their show all throughout the search, doing like daily updates and whatnot. Now remember, the searches took place between the 24th and the 29th of September. And one thing I thought was interesting with Andy is that he went into this very realistic. He was like, look, I know why we're here. I'm not at this point anticipating finding my sister alive, basically. He's like, we're looking for a body at this point. And as much as I hate to sit here and say, yeah, you know what, he's probably right. I mean, there's just a level of you kind of got to, face the judge and go into it with a realistic expectation. And I felt like, sadly, he did that. He knew what he was in for. So let's talk about some of the things that he said, not only to Profiling Evil, but also, doing interviews with like Denver 7 and other news channels like that. So he started this off with saying, I definitely think it's foul play. I don't think she ever got on that bicycle. He felt like it was planted evidence. And he straight up said, my sister was murdered and she was planted in a 3.5-hour drive radius. And he says, she's going to be somewhere in that circle, and I know that's what happened. His main goal was to find his sister to bring her home for a proper burial back home in Indiana. And he said, you know what, look, I'm not here to be the judge and jury and find someone guilty, not guilty. That's law enforcement's job. Main concern, getting my sister's remains home. Now let's circle back around to the bike, because that's such a central piece of evidence. Again, he does not think that she left that bike where it was found. And in one interview, he does say, look, you couldn't ride that bike off that cliff without being severely injured and leaving behind traces of something. He believes that someone picked up that bike and threw it over the edge. So let's talk for a second about the dynamics with him and Barry. Now, remember, he hasn't talked to Barry for a while, a long time. So a huge thing on the search was, is Barry going to join in the search? Is he going to let them on the property? All this kind of stuff. Well, eventually, Barry allows them on the property, which was very intriguing to me. Now, Andy says, you know what? I did not personally talk to him. The guy that was with me talked to him, and there was a good communication, I guess, if you could there. But Barry let them on the property. He let dogs on the property. And basically, essentially, nothing would ever came of that. Nothing was found. So, and in subsequent interviews, discussions, I should say, with Profiling Evil and Dr. Phil, he says, you know what, I don't think that she's at that house, in more than one way. So, and I think that we can probably rest comfortably now knowing how much the police went in there. Them, going on these searches on the property with the dogs, that, whatever took place, whatever happened, she's not there anymore. Now, a big thing of excitement along the way was these passive hits that the dogs did in these searches, and eventually those were vetted out, and sadly nothing came of it. Now, when that happened, I was like, oh my God, here we go. I was stoked about it. I was like, here we go. Oh my gosh, they found her. So it was a letdown for that. But at least it took place. At least there was some form of an answer. Now, another thing that took place is Profiling Evil. They have on their website a thing called the Evidence Room. Now, this is essentially another way that you can go to submit tips, evidence, what have you. Now, that link is down in the description. And the guys over there said, you know what? We received some stuff that we passed along to the CBI, the FBI, proper authorities. And, it was very helpful. So, again, with these kind of cases like this, if you want to submit stuff, if you have information that could be helpful, not hindering the case, so on and so forth, this is just another good avenue to do that. So be sure and check that out. Now, on one of the concluding interviews that Andy did with Profiling Evil, he was like, you know what? I know this crime was committed by one person with no witnesses. Now, of course, that dynamic is going to make it even that much more harder to solve, to unlayer, what have you. Now, he also said that the CBI was very thankful to him for organizing this event, all that he had done. They were like, wow, awesome, this is really getting things going. And he said this, and I found this very interesting. He said that they said, we wish we could share everything with you, but we just can't to protect the case. And Andy's thankful for that, and I am too. That's one thing that we see with these cases where I think things get muddled down. Too much information gets out there. So I'm glad that they are being protective of that. I also think it's interesting and confirming to know they know more than we know. So, there's a reason why everything is happening the way it is. Now, Andy says he is confident that this will go to trial. And one thing that he was talking to the guys at Profiling Evil over, and I really like this dynamic of their conversation, is essentially saying, you know what, I got to come out here and search in all the places that I wanted to essentially do all he was thinking of and going over and over in his mind of, well, I would go here, I would look here. Well, this person said to try this, and that person said to try that. So he's like, I got to come out here and do it thanks to everybody. And that right there was amazing because, like I said before, and like he said in talking to the guys on Profiling Evil, at least it gave him answers. It might not have been the answer he was looking for, which obviously is bringing Suzanne home, but knowing that something is not that, at least, it lets you rest at ease from the unknown, if you will. And for instance, he says, one thing we've learned is, yeah, she's not just laying out there from a bike fall or because some mountain lion got her. We've thoroughly vetted this area. We've had dogs. We've looked over every square inch. There would be something left behind, some other clue. So he's like, yeah, you know what? Those two things didn't show that, didn't, bring her up in that way, but at least we know that didn't happen. Now, another very intriguing interview that he did is with Dr. Phil. Now, I felt like on this one, it was no holds bar. It was like, what do you really think? Here you go. Now, when asked by Dr. Phil, what got you onto this train of thought of, Barry being somehow involved in this situation? And Andy sat there and said, he's like, you know what, Barry's a good hunter, he's an excellent tracker, and he said, the first things that Barry was coming out with is the mountain lion thing, the falling over the cliff with the bike. And Andy said, when I got out there and I looked at this area, I looked over the hill, and he was like, immediately I was just like, oh my God, if somebody went over this on a bike, number one, the bike would be completely mangled. Number two, there'd be blood, there'd be stuff. This would be a serious, serious injury that would leave some form of evidence. And the same thing with the mountain lion. There would be something behind that a dog would pick on something. Now, Andy also said, when he confronted Barry with this information, with the doubts about this, he said it was like Barry didn't want to hear any other thing besides those being the two options. Now, some of the other reasons he cited were ones that we've already seen come up. You know, he said, look, after all this went down and authorities want to do, you know, voice analysis, polygraphs, Barry refused to do those things. He also brought up the EVI, the electronic vehicle info, and he says that did not line up with the story that Barry was saying. And he also brought up those recent developments with the employees that we saw, with them discussing the hotel room at the Holiday Inn and how it smelled like bleach and how that whole trip was just really weird and they didn't really know what was going on. Now, a question that Dr. Phil asked that I was very thankful for, because I was like, you know what, I've wondered this too. Dr. Phil said, I'm trained in forensic psychology. And I'm not sure why he had to say that, but he did, so there's that. But he said, you know, is it normal, is it like on brand for the Morphews on Mother's Day for Suzanne to get up by herself and go biking and Barry to run off on a job? You know, that doesn't really sound right. And Andy confirmed that. He's like, no, that does not sound like something they would do. I was thinking the same thing, but I was like, you know what? I don't know their family. I don't know how they roll. That could be normal. But it just sounded odd to me that they would just split all their ways on Mother's Day like that. Now, in regards to that EVI, remember the electronic vehicle info, Andy said that, you know, Barry was saying, oh, look, at 5 a.m. I saw Suzanne. But then he said that the vehicle information, as well as testimony from the employees, showed that Barry was in the car driving around at 4 a.m. scrambling to get these employees up to Broomfield for this job. So essentially it's like you couldn't be in both places. Now, Andy also tells Dr. Phil, look, before Mother's Day, day before Mother's Day, 4 p.m., Suzanne is seen in town with Barry getting a sandwich. And that around midnight that night, all of a sudden, someone on her Facebook account friended all these guys like around Andy's age on there. Now, this is what Andy says that his theory is. He theorizes that sometime between 4 p.m. and 12 a.m., the day before Mother's Day and then early morning Mother's Day, that is when whatever happened to Suzanne happened. So, you know, she was taken from us, you know, whatever took place happened then. And then between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m., on Mother's Day morning, the wee hours of the morning, is when something was done to dispose of her body. Now, he says that 12 a.m. Facebook thing, he thinks that acts almost like the middle zone for everything. He thinks that that is somebody manipulating her Facebook account to make it look like she was active and alive and doing things at that hour. Now, of course, Barry denies all of this. I mean, and Dr. Phil said that in this. You know what? We're not trying to say that he did this. He's not here to defend himself, basically, but I can tell you if he was, he would be saying, no, I did not do this. And so that's the story that Barry is sticking to, that he had nothing to do with this. So it's just turned into, in my opinion, another Photos Doulos. You know, one of these cases where you're just like, my God, you know, what takes place with this? But again, we don't know if he did this or not yet. So at this point, we just have to sit by and wait to see what the evidence shows. And I'm very curious to see what they come out of this with, what more happens. I feel like all of a sudden there's going to be some veil lifted that's like, hey, this is what we know, and these are the charges against whoever they decide these charges are going against, wherever that evidence points. And that's when we're all going to be like, wow. Just like when they released that video of Photos and his gal pal dropping clothes off around town and trash cans clearly on video. So I just think something like this will pop off of this case. Now remember to check the links out down below. Check out Profiling Evil, all these other places where you can submit info if you have it. I appreciate you watching. If you want to see more of my commentary on this case, just click the videos that are popping up, and I'll talk to you later.